The board has returned from closed session, and so the next item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Moving forward with the approval of minutes, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the September 22nd, 2020 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the first closed session of the September 22nd, 2020 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the second closed session of the September 22nd, 2020 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Public comment tonight. Were there anybody out? No? Okay. We did receive, and we are I'm not going to read email public comments at this particular meeting because we're moving away from that as our practice for the time being. But I will say, I will ask Kevin, it came into Kevin, and the topic is the possibility of creating a maskless class, so students not wearing masks. So what I'm going to say is I'll have Kevin forward this to all the board members so that they can read it. And if you feel passionate about this topic or that it's something that needs to be discussed by the whole board, somebody can add it to the next agenda. This is not a topic that I am interested in adding to the agenda, but if somebody else wants to add it, that would be up to you. Okay. Let's move forward then with our consent agenda. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented. Number 1, personnel recommendations. Jerry Ann Ortega, Instructional Teachers Assistant, Westmont High School. Nolia Reyes, Instructional Teacher Assistant at Westmont High School. Thomas White, Girls Sophomore Basketball Coach, Westmont High School. Amelia Kuzmanovska, Night Custodian, Westmont High School. Christian Zabate, Volunteer Wrestling Coach, Westmont High School.
So moved.
Second.
A roll call, please.
Ms. Gromeyer?
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Ms. Conover?
Yes.
Ms. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Redomio?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes. Okay, that brings us to our information and discussion section of the meeting, and the first topic here is Village of Westmont Stormwater Management. And we have Steve May joining us by Zoom for a discussion on this topic.
So I'll turn it over to Steve in a second, but Steve is the village administrator for the Village of Westmont, and he shared with the board a document that kind of summarizes some of the options that they're looking at for the stormwater management. And they're looking to work with the school district because it would utilize a portion of Manning Playground. And with that, Steve, I'll turn it over to you if you want to kind of summarize the project, and then we'll open up the questions.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for having me this evening. this project that I'm describing tonight is not a new idea, and we've been thinking about it for many years, but it is a reaction to the, which you're probably all very familiar with at Manning School, in the largest of storms, the flooding that kind of happens out on the street on Norfolk Avenue, and both gets up onto the private properties, onto the school property, and kind of, renders that portion, that half block of the street, useless during the event. If it's just other than what's happening on the private properties, if that happens outside of school hours, it's not as disruptive, but, as a neighborhood thing, it's a concern. And the fact is that Norfolk there, 100 feet east of the intersection is the low point, in the entire surrounding area. So that's, a natural place to do it. What we've been looking at is I'm going to call it a detention basin, a dry bottom detention basin, but not a detention basin in a traditional way that you would see for a development or a neighborhood where you're actually creating a volume to offset the impact of like a development or a parking lot or some new improvement you're doing that's generating more runoff fast. You would detain the water, hang on to it, store it, and release it at a rate that was equivalent to what it would have released naturally, in a pre-developed state. Here, even though technically it is a detention basin, it does not have a design volume or a design storm. We're merely trying to mitigate the surface flooding and relocate it off the street, and the immediately next door on this vacant property is a prime opportunity to do that. The document that Kevin said was distributed is a previous to that. I sent some excerpts out of the study, just trying to show you some of the site plans and the different options, the different ways that could turn out. In all cases, it's school-owned property, district-owned property, and in a joint project, if you will, with the Village of Westmont, we'd be looking to access that property and encumber it in an easement or purchase it, but somehow have control over the grassy space, either in whole or in part, to utilize, gain some volume, some storage off-site. This study I sent in full for your distribution. It is all the engineering stuff that I'm certain you won't be interested in, but the exhibits in there are kind of what we're talking about. The study is dated April 2016, so that's only 4 years ago, but I can tell you we've been looking at this for at least 25 years, in different ways. And our attention's not limited to this parcel either. There is the west side of Linden Avenue and the bank properties over there. There's many parts to this, but this part concerns the school district, and before we spend any more time investigating it, I'm actually asking, I don't even need an answer tonight, but I'm looking for, first of all, conceptual agreement on what we're talking about. Is there a preference to, assuming that you're good with the project, of course, to using half the property or a whole property? It all has different features for us from the village's perspective, and from a stormwater management perspective, and a civil engineering only perspective. The bigger the better. So the more area and the deeper you can go will affect what volume of water can be stored on that property, and then back calculating from there, you can figure out what that design storm would be. But like I said, that's not really an important factor from our perspective. We're just trying to move it over, relocate it a little bit, mitigate it. So the exhibits, there are 4, particular, I honestly, I forget which ones were submitted, last month, or maybe it was the month before. But the figures 4, 5, 6, and 7 have the 4 different types of layouts that would be useful. 2 of them are half the parcel, 2 of them are the whole parcel, and then of each of those 2 examples, one's 4 foot deep, one's 3 foot deep. So there's just different combinations of the way it can go, and we're not even limited to this. I found it interesting that the vacant parcel that you have, you see it as 1 lot, but it's actually 3 residential zoned parcels. And, but one of our design options are, half. So I would even, consider 2/3, 1/3. And why would you have, well, first of all, it's your property, but why would you have interest in how much of this that we would be interested in is because there was pavement in there before, it was recreational space. Basketball, at one time there was a very large diameter tree on that lot. If any of you remember that, I believe it was a victim of lightning. But relocating any recreational amenity, if we want to maintain it as for recreational use, recess, for example, we can reserve the north third or the north half for, reinvesting in playground area, whether that's pavement or whatever amenity would be. That's where, what I'm asking you is what would you like to see out of this project as well? Because I'm really primarily only equipped to speak towards the stormwater benefit that we're looking to get out of it, but the rest of it is would be all your preferences. So, I can get into more details about the design, but that really sums up the topic. Is this something of interest in participating? Can I, continue to design plans? Is there a preference to, whole, half, 2/3, those types of things? And then I can continue with investing in a more detailed design of what that might be. And when all said and done, when we agree with a direction, we would of course prepare, an easement document, an easement agreement of what all you would expect out of this project, whether it's limits or amenities, and before granting an easement to the Village of Westmont to use that space. Or like I said, if there's a preference to just selling it, we could have it appraised and go that way too. But really it'll be green space before and after. It'll still be usable as, dry recreational space, except during the actual thunderstorm. But initiate any, initial questions yet?
I have a question on the background from this, and I don't know if you can speak to it, but I have a question. You said you've been looking at this for years. And what has any of the work that's been done in Westmont affected this, like the need for it? So I know there's been projects and stormwater projects over Westmont that have been done already. How has it affected the need for this?
I think it was a very faint question on my end, but I think I grasped it. It's like what's generating the need for this area may be different now than was before as well. As a community, village-wide, we have a stormwater. It's not a formal utility, but we do have a stormwater management program and a sales tax increment that funds that allows us to get into neighborhoods and provide stormwater management in areas that didn't have it before. So any new development since don't quote me exactly, but since the 1980s, Westmont has had a stormwater management ordinance, actually before DuPage County did, and still remain a little slightly stricter than the county's minimum ordinance as well. And any new development, whether it's commercial or residential subdivision, all has to build in stormwater management as part of their improvement. And in areas where, I prefer not to name examples because it's not relevant, but there's commercial properties up on Ogden that were already paved. and then they did an improvement, we made them put in stormwater management, in retrospect, in hindsight, just because they were touching it. So there are a lot of, you get into the oldest part of town, everything from Ogden Avenue to 55th Street, and there's no neighborhood, there's no regional stormwater management. It's the oldest part of town, it's got the oldest storm sewer infrastructure, and it's loaded with depressional areas that sit inundated until there's capacity in that storm sewer. I could speak another half an hour on the watersheds, but Westmont itself is a high point in a major watershed divide, the major being the difference between, it's not exactly Cass Avenue, but roughly Cass Avenue for its length through town. The water on the east side goes towards Clarendon Hills and trying to find its way to the Des Plaines River, whereas everything west is going through Downers Grove and towards the DuPage River. And it comes with unique features. So this whole town developed back in 1900s and 1920s, didn't have any stormwater management taken into account. The storm sewers are small, and so we are plugging in area detention basins throughout. This particular one, as I described in the beginning, is not looking to provide volume and storage for the neighborhood. It's really, honestly, just looking to move the volume that is storing on Norfolk Street. And the first home south is, the address is 139. Water gets way up onto that property, into the crawl space, floods the garage as well when it's at high water level. So we are trying to, guard against public property damage as well. But it's not new storage, it's just moving what's there. So I'm not certain I answered your question, but.
Hi, Steve, it's Gary Armstrong. How are you today?
Doing well, sir, thanks.
Good. I understand the concept here, and I always want to try to help the village, but I just can't get this picture out of my mind of after a rain event the next day of a muddy lot that the kids are going to want to run around in and play in, and there's going to be additional bugs during those rain events, and we've got all these school kids here. That's what concerns me. When we first talked about this, we talked about putting it underground. I'd be happy to talk about anything underground, but I just can't get this picture of young kids playing around this muddy field for several days after it rains. Okay, and I'm sorry, unless somehow I can be more satisfied in that area, in my personal opinion only, I can't see storing water on the school property in an open field.
Okay, well, understanding that concern, there was actually two parts to that comment. We did talk about underground detention, but when I was referencing that, it was the other properties that I was talking about, the bank properties, where if you're going to put storage in a parking lot where you still intend to have parking, that's where you would invest in the structure of underground storage and pave over the top of it so that you can still drive on it. Something like that wouldn't be warranted for turf, but that aside, the same point being, referring to the diagram, and admittedly they're engineering plans, but each of those solid blue lines, in the ovals are contour lines, and each one's a foot apart from each other in elevation. So if you look where the little inlet is on any of the examples, it's marked as 738 or 736.5, depending on which one you are, and you see it slopes up to the north, from there. So the design of the bottom of the basin is such that it will drain out, it will all slope to that sewer inlet, and will have a little bit of a pitch on the bottom of it so that it does not ever become muddy, and in fact you can mow it otherwise. I can give you some good examples where the bottom of the basin was built too flat, like Quincy and Oak, on the east side of town. That became a naturalized wetland as well. Or I can throw that out there too. If it's not needed for turf recreational space, there's nothing preventing us from considering naturalizing all the plantings in there, and it would be more like North Warwick, was the last example we did of that in the 400 block of North Warwick. And then, that's up by Fritz Worley Park, and then, our oldest example is probably Muddy Waters Park on the south side of town, where we maintain detention that's with a park district relationship. But that's all naturally planted. The work we did in Deer Creek was recently converted from a muddy bottom pond to a naturally planted one too. So that is an option we could consider if interested.
Is that
I
Muddy
assume you want
Waters
the turf
Park,
space, the
Is
room to
that-
run though.
that Muddy Waters Park, is that over by the yard, by Westmont Yard?
Yes.
Yes, it's actually by the,
There's a pond.
well, yeah, William Street and 63rd Street, so over by the skate park, kind of, in there. The low point of 63rd Street, it's
It's that,
conduct.
is it that
Farmingdale.
back section there, where there's like the soccer fields and then even further kind of south? Next to
Sorry,
the,
I'm
there's
not hearing the
like,
question.
sorry, there's a playground there, there's like a soccer field, there's the skate park, and then a soccer field, and then a playground. Is it that section next to the playground?
So that is Bella Reef Park, and I'm calling up a map here so I can describe that correctly. Bella Reef Park is over like across from the Marianos, but Muddy Waters is further west. So you go past the next intersection, which is Williams, or where I forgot the name of the diner on the corner, and you go right past there. That's Muddy Waters Park.
There's actually a lake there,
Okay.
or a small pond, call it.
Okay.
Williams and 63rd southwest corner. That's all naturally planted. And that's actually St. Joseph's Creek alignment, in fact.
So this is Adina Hoover again, the question I have with that. You kind of answered my question with that last part. You said you did another area that's naturally planted, you said, on Hennessy?
Quincy and Oak.
Wouldn't
And
you look, yeah.
But my question and following up, also with questions with kids playing, are these areas that are used by kids that they, because I think another area you say that I don't ever really see kids recreational activities or even like families using these areas to say that they don't have issue with it.
Yeah, so the Muddy Waters Pond that I referred to for purposes of the natural planting area is also a retention basin where, it's a water source in the bottom. And another good example of that is the newly developed park by the Park District, Burness Park on South Wilmette, where there's a long, deep water feature that's on there. And when you design a wet bottom detention basin, it is much deeper than the water surface, and that's intentional, so to kind of keep the weeds and the cattails from growing up through it. But there's also a shelf underneath the shore that, should somebody get into the water, it would be 3 feet down or 4 feet down, then you always got the ability to stand up. The basin that we're talking about, of course, will be dry bottom, will be adjacent to public sidewalk. We don't have any examples at all. I mean, we design them with slopes so they can be navigated should some reason an errant bicycle or somehow someone end up in it. They've always got the ability to stand up. And I'm looking and I'm trying to think at the same time. I don't know of any examples where we have a fenced in or a protected detention basin. They're normally, nicely used vacant lots. And we design them to be used, so.
Kevin, can I ask Lindsay, Mrs. Peters, I have a question?
Sure.
No, you weren't here to answer this, but Steve, the principal of Manning, just happens to be in the room with us today. This is Dana Strohmeyer. If I wouldn't mind, how is that space used currently? And what happens when there's rain now? does it mean that the space can't be used because it's muddy there already? Or can you help us understand from the school's perspective how that space is used?
Yes, so I'm assuming this is gonna be south, correct? I have not seen the map.
Why don't you go over closer to Steve and then
Sure.
Lindsay, if you're answering a question, Steve,
Yeah.
she's gonna come over closer to the computer.
Lindsay, they're
Yeah,
talking
thanks.
about the parking
Yeah.
lot across. the
Appreciate
street
that.
from Lindsay.
Yeah.
Yes, but just, is it south? Because there is a flooding issue. Hi.
Hi.
Okay, so we're talking about south closest to Norfolk, correct? Instead of north versus Naperville Road, yes? So the south. part.
Correct. The Norfolk itself is where we're experiencing the issue, so immediately adjacent, the public sidewalk there on Norfolk, which would be the south half or the south portion of the lot is the ideal location to manage this, so they could back up there.
Yeah, so currently that does flood when it rains, so it has been basketball courts that have not been refinished. There's a gravel part, so our kids do try to dig because there are puddles there, especially the younger kids. So that area does flood after rain and it's really not usable when you try to year round, so it is something that is muddy. And we have to, luckily it's so large that we're able to use areas around it and then also that north playground. But we do use all spaces outside as much as possible. But yes, when it rains, even without the retention, it does flood.
Can I?
All right, then, thank you for that, and agreeing with it, that's there's, if you need, that's just kind of corroborates what I'm saying. It speaks to the, the need or the benefit from regrading the parcel so that it always does have a small slope on it so that it doesn't stay soggy. And then if the pavement parts and the basketball, if that's worth to maintain, the best place to put that would be on the north. The best place for me would be to put that on the north, and, we could redesign that or reconfigure it. I'm not so sure the neighbor to the north would agree with that, but.
Yeah, and if someone who plays basketball, those trees might get in the way, but definitely if you went a little farther east, up, depending on how much you want to use it, you could definitely reposition it.
Can I ask Lindsay how she feels about this project and what her concerns
With
are?
3 minutes notice.
I just think that, I'm not sure, I, as a school board member, have all of the considerations to think about. I was curious if you had any other thoughts about this project.
Well, COVID hit, so there's been a little bit different priority. I know it's something that's been talked about for years since I've been there. And there's always some grandiose plans for what we would love to do. It's across the street, so there's always been some creative options, but it's always been at a standstill to kind of hear what the plans were. I'm not opposed, I don't have an opinion necessarily either way, because it is an eyesore over there, and when it rains, it doesn't become usable. But I definitely agree with Gary of, now you're adding in a dip, I can't visualize how deep it would be, but are we talking about kids being in danger and a different level of supervision that would be needed? So I'm not opposed to anything, I just think that I also haven't really thought it through right now. I hope.
Yeah.
Nice and neutral, thanks.
Steve, can you speak to you said that you build these so that a child can stand. But there's been instances of other retention ponds in other school districts where children have
It
drowned.
needs to be repeated.
You referenced some of the, and I think Dana's talking more of a detention pond, that
Yeah.
some of them have been designed with a shelf so that somebody can get out of them. But she's referencing some districts have had detention areas on their property and students have drowned. And so I think the question is that a concern with what you're proposing?
Well, I'm not familiar with what occurred. It's possible to drown in 2 inches of water. It's possible to drown in the water that's building up in the street too. So that, I don't know if there's ever a drown-proof, situation, but all of our designs are, one to keep the property maintainable, mowable, usable, And during the actual storm itself, I would not, it'd be hard to imagine that if immediately after a thunderstorm, anyone would allow resource to empty into an area that was a detention basin. I'm trying to think, I know it's not your district, but you know, Marker School has a very deep area, you know, to the east of their main school, you know, along the bus drop off there. And it's like way down in there, and it has the opportunity to collect a lot of water, but you don't use it in the thunderstorm, and then it drains down, you know, typically within a day in the worst storms, less than that, you know, routinely. So, I mean, it could be, we don't use fences anywhere for that reason. It is not, you know, the deepest point at the outlet structure will be 3 feet deep, so, you know, a yardstick. And I don't, you know, that is, you know, I guess a built-in concern, but no way to protect against it. I suppose if you didn't want people on the lot in the off hours on the weekend, you know, a fence amenity would help access to the area, you know, at that time. But it's not necessary for the stormwater management part, but if that's something that would like to be incorporated, you know, there's an opportunity there too.
So we do have one area, if I'm thinking about it the right way, the high school also has that area kind of out front that water, you know, when it rains, fills up. So we already do have on our properties, you know, this situation. So if we're
Yes, to
concerned
the
about,
high school.
yeah, at the high school.
Yeah.
If we're concerned about, you know, then we should be equally concerned. I know the kids are, you know, younger at Manning, obviously, but.
But that's not a playground.
Right.
That's true.
That's not a playground. I mean, the kids don't go running out there during recess hours. And again, Steve, it's Gary Armstrong, and I'm sorry, I do want to work with the village on this, at least from my perspective again, but student safety is probably the most important thing that we think about. I'm sure you think about it too. You know, everybody's safety is important. So please remember, as you're talking about this, we're talking about little kids here, first graders, second graders, third graders, fourth graders. We're going to be going out there every day running around that area. Now, I understand other areas, you don't put up the fences or you don't have these concerns. I understand that. I think if you want us to be more open to this, we need to hear a better plan for student safety on a daily basis. At least I do, because I just can't see allowing a large amount of water right next to a little kid's playground. There's really no other example in the town that you can give me that isn't, you know, managed differently. But I mean, this is every day from September through June. We're going to have little kids running by this water, and that's my concern. And unless we can go with some type of safety thing, at least from, again, my perspective, I can't see it. Can't see doing it.
Yes, and I'm, you know, appreciating the comment, and if you're, and not to debate it or disagree with it, but I guess I'm just reiterating, it's not new water that we're bringing there. It's water that's already being stored right there at that location. We're just moving it 50 feet north.
How quickly do you see these areas dry out?
Yeah.
So we get a 2-year storm, a 5-year storm, and you bring it up in your report, a 2-year storm, 5-year storm, 10-year storm, 25-year storm, 100-year storm. So the existing kind of retention basin areas, how quickly do you see them empty? And then also kind of how quickly do you see them usable, if you will, post a severe rain?
Kevin, would you mind repeating that?
Sure, the question is, that you reference in your document, you know, a 2-year storm, 5-year storm, you know, 100-year storm, 25-year storm. And the question is, after a significant rain, how long does it take it to drain? And then how long before the area is usable for the kids to play on?
The largest storm events we have, we do have 2-year and 5-year, and I mentioned that a little bit in the beginning. That's kind of a belt back calculation. So since we're not designing for any size storm here, and it's not new volume of water, just a new location, but the biggest events, the biggest ever event in my career here was probably 1987, and the three last biggest ones that we could consider 100-year storms, well, certainly in 2013, and then at October of 2017, and the one earlier this year in May of 2020 was not quite a 100-year storm, but it was a large event, and that flooded that street and got into the, its typical highest point, and that was all gone by later the same day. And of course, it's a street, so it's usable, immediately as soon as the water's off of it. But in a turfed area, it would be usable by the next day. It's about 24 hours you want it to drain down. But that's if you were designing a detention basin from scratch for a certain purpose. Here, we're at the mercy of the capacity of the storm sewer system leading out of this neighborhood, which is small and runs to the south to Burlington Avenue. So that will always be the governing element.
Do you see any increase in mosquitoes, bugs, etc., where we've got these spots? Is that water around long enough for that?
Did you hear that, Steve?
I only heard, was there any increase and then not the rest?
Yeah, is there an increase in the number of mosquitoes, that type of thing, as a result of water being in the detention area?
So that's I can talk to you another hour about mosquitoes and vector control, but the short answer is standing water that's not moving is the concern for mosquito larvae. And that would be ponds that ponds that are normally wet, and it's worse when you have a drought. When you have rain and you have, eggs are laid on the surface tension of the water surface. So when you got something trapped in like a tire in the backyard and nothing's disturbing it and stays still, that's very, productive for a mosquito. If, in the water sources, we do actually treat water bodies, like some of the ones that we have. But this is a detention basin that is, going up and down. There's, not a mosquito concern here unless the water, didn't leave, or like on the playground that you have now, or whoever was describing, an area that stays wet, that would be a concern. But not by virtue of the fact that it's a detention basin, no.
Steve, can I ask one last question? Do you think that this project is going to help if the area is already being flooded? Is this project going to help the school's property drain better, or is it going to make it worse? So it might help the surrounding area, but my concern is that the school district's property.
Well, by virtue of touching it and regrading it and put in construction, I will say that it'll help that portion of the parcel that we touch. And if that's the whole thing, we can regrade the whole thing to, improve that. If you mean the benefit to school, like future development, if there was a building addition or a new parking lot, or let's say the north third of this, half of this lot, you wanted to make a parking lot, that would generate new need for more volume. And this would not be a help to that because this volume that we're designing for already is there. So it's not new storage. And so in that respect, it doesn't help the school, but it helps the parcel, and more for us, admittedly, it mostly helps Norfolk Street, the pavement itself, the pavement and the public sidewalk along Norfolk. That's the benefit to the Village of Westmont and the community. And the resident at 139 South London.
What's the timing for a project like this? What's the, or when would you?
Well, I regret, why did we bring this up again now? I was, when it sounded like school might not be meeting, and it was like, oh, here's an opportunity to, do something while there's not students in attendance, and I know that that recently changed. So if we come to a consensus of what we would like to see, and I can start more detailed design work on it, that would be, we would do that through the winter so that it's ready to bid in the spring. But, the best time to do it is when school's out. So we would probably construct it in summer when it's the driest. However, to get the turf to grow, you would, it's going to be later in the fall, and school will be back in September and October. So that would be disruptive in that way. There's no way to get grass to grow well in July and August.
So what's the benefit to the school? On rainy days, the bus line is easier. Am I missing
I need your
something?
question repeated, please.
Yeah, the question is, what is the benefit to the school? One perceived benefit is that on a rainy day, the bus line, it might be easier because you won't have standing water. But other than that, what is the benefit to the school?
No, that's the direct benefit, those operations during the actual school day, if it happens to be flooded at, pickup or drop off, peak time. Other than that, it's more of just assistance to the community when we partnership with the school in other areas and the park district mostly, but it's using jointly owned public properties for the greater public good, if you will. This is just an opportunity we don't have on our properties. So if it needs to be a benefit to the school, if there's another way to look at this, if you prefer to sell half of it, and then it would be a village-owned parcel, village-owned liability, village-owned everything else, and it would be there, and then you would have like a cash benefit. But I don't know if that's practical or not. There's also you have opportunities to apply, the TIF proceeds, of which only some of you will recognize, but, is there a way to invest, do something bigger here too? And that's just kind of what I'm probing from you all.
I think I have to understand the benefit to the school. We're struggling financially, we've got a lot of building stuff coming up, and I'm just not understanding what the benefit to the school is. I've got to see that too, instead of just moving on the rainy days when we have that, for me, might not be enough. Without some other type of benefit that we can figure out.
I understand. Yeah, just different public entities. We're looking for an opportunity.
Can you clarify for me if it will improve the drainage if the spot already doesn't drain well, will that be a benefit to us? That it will drain faster?
It sounds like the sewer is the reason for the draining.
Yeah.
The sewer is not gonna get better. This is just moving the water that's already there.
So the question, Steve, is, Lindsay Peterzak talked about how even now that area, if we have rain, is not playable for the kids. So the question is, as a result of the village doing some work on it, does that improve that site, the school site, draining as well, so that that site would be playable sooner, I guess is the question.
Well, I would expect so, and that would be the intent. It'll be, the idea is to improve it, so to make it better. So we do get this feature out of it. Now, granted, the bottom of it, to get that benefit, would have a slight slope in it. So if you were, you wouldn't be able to play soccer intelligently on it because it all, rolls to one corner. But just be an outdoor space, it's comfortable to be on, and that should be an improvement, yes. Or we would make it so.
So,
We don't have a big, topographic survey of the parcel. The investment is this preliminary engineering. The topography is from aerial topography. So these are concepts today. And, but I'm glad for these questions because this is what we're, looking to hear is what is the benefit you want to, get out of it and should find a way to incorporate it.
All right, is there any more discussion or questions on that? Steve, do you have anything else you want to add to it? I think the board obviously needs to
No.
think about it a little bit and
Thank you.
revisit the
The purpose was to
topic.
get you information and, when you have a conclusion, certainly through, Superintendent Carey, if you want to just get back to me what your wishes are, if you want to subcommittee this out, we can work on it offline and then report back later too.
I'm sorry, can I ask one more question? What would be the village's preference?
Thank you all.
Half parcel for a full parcel?
One more question, Steve. So does the village have a preference, half parcel versus full parcel?
Preference, I'm gonna answer that indirectly. The more volume we can get off the street, the better it is solely from a stormwater management point of view. So the half parcel that's, the volume shown on here, it's called acre feet, and that would be 1 acre of area 1 feet deep, if you can picture that much water. So the half parcel is either 0.47 acre feet, half an acre foot, at the 3 foot depth, and then at the 4 foot one, which I don't want to do because it requires, a pump. But it's 0.8, so not quite double, but you can get, just going down the extra, actually it's 1.5 feet. With that sewer outlet, makes a big difference in the volume. So using the whole parcel, will be more volume. The pump version is 1.34 acre feet, and the unpumped gravity version, can't find it, is, 1.34. Exhibits are all 11 by 17. So here it is. Gravity, using the entire parcel, the gentlest slope, but only 3 feet deep, is 0.74 acre foot. So that version is the exact same volume size as the half version pumped. So that didn't answer your question. The more area and the deeper I can go is our preference, and it's, it's easier to regrade. But it takes away from flat opportunities if you want. I'll just make it up. I have no idea if you've got interest in reestablishing basketball, but if you need a flat paved surface at the north end, that would be the decision as to whether or not you would afford us all of it, or 2/3 of it, or half of it. We would work with whatever was available.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Is this something that?
Thank you all.
Thank you. Is this something that is a good thing to subcommittee out now? Or is this too much in light of what you guys have going on at the district level? This might be a priority for the village, but
Right.
can
right.
the school district handle the continued conversation with this or not?
I think we can have some preliminary conversations, like, discussion with Lindsay and get Bill Smith, our building and grounds person, involved. Have some preliminary conversations, because, part of the question about what is a benefit for the district other than, helping with standing water on Norfolk and Linden. Lindsay referenced the basketball courts. They do need, something needs to be done with them. And so I know in the past, some preliminary conversations, the village was willing to relocate the basketball court for us. So, but without, I don't want to put Lindsay on the spot right now, but I don't know if Lindsay wants a paved area with basketball hoops on it. Maybe, you know, the elementary school would have better use if it was all grass space, you know, so those are conversations that, yes, we could have. I don't think they're very involved, so that if it is something that the board thinks they want to entertain, those are some of the things that the village needs from us, okay? So in addition to allowing us to use half the lot, are you guys looking to replace those basketball courts? That's some of the things that they need on their end, so that they can continue their process.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to our next topic, which is the first quarter grade reports.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. You're all set, Lindsay?
All right. Can you pull up on the screen or?
Oh,
This one?
I'll turn it.
I'm not looking down. All right, hopefully we can be succinct in our conversation. So a couple of years ago, Manning and Miller went on a journey to update their way of grading, and through our PLC work at all grade levels K through 5, we really talked about what are our grading practices now, what do we like about them, how do we communicate with our families effectively, and so that we could adequately share progress of student learning over the course of a year. So we've had several meetings over the course of the years. COVID hit, so we did present in June, but it's definitely changed the direction in some good ways for us, but also looking into this school year, we want to be clearly communicating what our focuses are and how we plan to continue to move forward with best practice. So topics to review, for those that are new, we want to go through the why. We're going to talk a little bit just about our progression of how our teachers and administrators have worked through this together. And then looking into this school year, what our plans are. And then obviously finishing off, we have fall and spring conferences. Fall is coming up in a week, is it? Who would have thought? That we're already at the end of our first quarter. So we'll discuss and kind of give some parents some things to be thinking about and coming into those 15-minute really brief conferences, using and maximizing that time with teachers so that all parties, we have our teachers, we have our parents, and most importantly our students, walk away with how can I move forward, learn and grow as a student. So the whole reason why we looked into standards-based grading, K1 has been in that trajectory for a long time. They were reported out by skill for a very long time. When we looked at grades 2 through 5, it's a little bit different. We had grades at one time that were in place. We had differences between Manning and Miller. And so we really looked at how do we accurately show student proficiency to parents, communicate that to students. How do we have clear criteria that we can communicate to all those stakeholders? And how do we have this conversation that really helps all students understand, and parents, the difference between understanding proficiency in a content area versus a learner habit. They're not separate of each other in that they impact each other, and COVID has definitely shown us as teachers and also on the student end, I think they realize what a learner habit does to create a successful student. But we wanted to have two conversations instead of kind of muddying the waters of one grade mixing effort with proficiency of, let's say, a reading standard. So over our PLC conversations with grade levels, just as a grade level and then vertically as buildings, we looked at our priority standards for reporting and where was the focus. There are lots of standards in Common Core, and we want to be able to effectively communicate progress and do it well. Just to say that we've been able to, on a test, say, this looks at this standard once, okay, that's one point in time. How do we effectively gather lots of evidence that we can really then say to a student and a parent, this is what our student is demonstrating, and here are the examples of how that is happening. We also created rubric scales. So this was helpful in saying, okay, if a student is proficient, why are they proficient? What does that look like? So what does that look like for a student and making it student friendly? And then what does that look like on the parent end of understanding, well, I'm not in the classroom, what does that really look like? As dual language was a part of these conversations as their grade level, and then as their own dual language team. You have standards that are specifically Spanish that are a part of now Otis. And then something that really we were forced into in a really positive way, but how to provide feedback, which is the whole point of learning, is to receive feedback from your teachers, learn from that, and then be able to improve based on what those specific improvements may be. What are you doing well that you want to continue as a student, and then what are some things that we need to improve, and how do we all work together? So these are the conversations we had as a PLC over the past 3 years. So then COVID hits in the spring semester. I mean, we really had a lot of work done in those years. We adapted curriculums for math and for ELA. All of our buildings and all of our grade levels were aligned. What we were teaching and when we were teaching was designed and really thought through as grade level teams, so that depending on where a student was, whether it be Miller or Manning or Class A or Class B, they had similar experiences. Those this year have really become a challenge for us because we started off the year like no other. So our scopes and sequences have completely needed to change, and luckily we have them in place, so it makes it easier for us to adapt and do it together. Our routines is probably the biggest. We've had to move from what typical traditional education looks like into starting the year remote, where we move away from learning the academics of reading, math, and writing to how do we get students, especially kindergarten through 5th grade, able to learn in these new ways. So the routines and the structures, we were finally getting in our groove of remote, and then teachers now, in good ways and in challenging ways, now deliver those routines in 2 ways. So they deliver it to students who are in the classroom while simultaneously having students zoom into the classroom. Pros and cons to both, but now, once again, when we look at, okay, we're trying to measure student proficiency and their progress, we have to move back to the basics and our basic needs of being successful in the classroom before we get to learning the content. So that really stresses those modes of learning and how they've changed so much. So our focus for this semester, as I'm sharing with teachers, our preparations for getting ready for the end of the quarter, and then thinking, oh my goodness, we've already been in school for 12 weeks, and when we think about all the things we've done, where our focus has been, here is where we are really reinvesting our time to make sure that as we move forward, we do so successfully. These are things we've talked about all along. We want to have student engagement, students that are invested and feel safe and connected in their classroom communities. We want to develop student learners in these new modes, and if you've been behind the screen or heard that students are doing well and they are learning, it's taking a little bit longer because these are all new things on the teacher end or on the student end, but those things take time, and we don't want to rush to something that we're not necessarily ready for until they can show us through those learner habits. And then probably the most important to this conversation is finding ways to authentically assess students. So we have very credible assessments that our PLCs have worked over the course of the past 3 years. Those come in the form of unit assessments at the end of an area of study. Those come in formative ways that teachers can do throughout the course of a unit. And what's happened is, in the modes of learning that we provide, we really question, are they reliable and valid? And the reason being, and not to anyone's fault, but some of the support that we may provide during those assessments in the classroom may be a little additional at home, and we notice that with our ready assessment, if a sibling or a parent may be supporting a student more than a teacher would in a classroom. Some students rush through, where in the classroom a teacher can stop and sit down with that student and make sure that the understanding is there. We never want to force a student to take a test and say, this is what you got. If we know that they know those skills, we might take that student aside and say, can you talk to me about this? And in that understanding, we can definitely say there is evidence there. So really, as we look at the end of a quarter, which in standards-based grading really is unheard of to really look at quarters. They move to trimesters or semesters. We are a unit district, so we are on a semester schedule versus a trimester. We are sharing these things with our teachers to really think about. So one of the huge positives that we've been forced into is that we used tools right off the bat to really provide things that are important to help students learn and grow. So the tools of Otis and Seesaw, and they're used by different grade levels for different things, allow us to still continue to move forward into standards-based grading, but rather than traditional report cards where I will say oftentimes parents say, I don't really know what's going on in school, and not necessarily, seeing some of the tests that are happening or the assessments that are going on. Well, now you get, for remote learning, you get a big dose of it, but now we have tools that provide ongoing communication, both for the teacher to give feedback, for the parent to see, but also for the student to receive as well. So there are 3 types when we talk about feedback grades and reporting. These are terms that get interchanged a lot. It's really important to understand the difference of them. A lot of our professional development in the spring, fall, and what continues is how do we provide information to our learners so they can improve. That's the goal. And if they're doing things well, we want to praise that because that's a form of feedback. Grades is a common way and a more traditional way to say you're doing well or you're not doing well. And it's really something we're trying to shift away from is, this is where you're at right now, and this is who you're identified as. Learners learn for a lifetime. These adults say that all the time. So although grades are often a time or a way to compare, especially when you're looking at peers in a classroom, really that feedback is where we want to move back to because that's about lifelong learning and growth. Reporting is taking a snapshot of that moment in time. And our tools of Otis and Seesaw allow for that not to be just a moment in time. So yes, we can still pull reports because they're both companies that say, we can help you with that. But they also provide an open door for parents to see, and as teachers are learning to use the tools more efficiently each day, share the progress of student learning. So just real quickly, we have moved away this year from traditional skyward reporting. Teachers used to have to double enter their work. So whatever they collected on paper and then we moved to Otis, they would still have to enter into skyward. Now all this stuff is directly pulled from Otis. It's directly linked to the standards. And then it tells us our 3 categories that we have, not meeting, working towards, and meets. So parents can clearly see what the skill is. So we have some standards in here and some learner habits, and then also the progress there. A very general moment in time glance. What makes it so powerful is that Otis allows you to dig deeper. It allows you to go within a standard over time, okay? We think of this is on the, oh my gosh, I gotta go back to my math days. This x-axis along here is being your time. So the beginning of the year towards the left, for hopefully the end of the year towards the right. And then you're not meeting, working towards the meets. So this is one standard, just one standard alone. Each dot on this chart shows a point of evidence where a teacher feels this is a demonstration of a student's understanding of an entire standard on this day, on this time. It could be one question. It could be a small group working together, and a teacher has taken an observation of that. But this gives a much better picture than if we go back and say, even think back to the times when we were in school, okay, A, B, C, D, here's a bar graph of where that student is. It allows this, the parent, and then the student gets to see this as well, to have a conversation about, okay, what do these points mean? Now I froze this, but in Otis you can hover over it. That dot tells you what assignment it was and how it was observed, and it tells you the date, so it helps you align those things. This is really where we want to move towards in standard-based grading. We don't want to lock in this, understanding by a quarter. or by a semester, but over the course of time. And so it's really important as we're thinking in COVID, where we focused a lot more on our learner habits and getting students ready. We have a lot of data on their preparedness to be a student in remote or hybrid learning. We now want to transition as we get better at those skills and students really understand what's expected, that we can now focus on finding reliable and valid evidence that we can report on in that way. We want to make sure it's authentic. We don't want to just collect evidence to say, okay, a parent wants to see this. We want to build, in a sense, a portfolio of evidence that will show over the course of time. So fall and spring conferences, things to think about as we continue to shape these conversations. One thing that we're doing is obviously presenting here, but we also have a podcast coming, which we started last year, to present to families, just to talk in, from a parent's perspective, what does standards-based grading mean for me as a parent, and how can I help my student to learn and grow? So part of our step after presenting here and having a podcast is really showing parents the tools of Otis to dig in a little bit deeper and see what that looks like. Right now most of them see just the student's view. There is a family side where you can check in on a student's grade book at any time. And as teachers are now feeling more comfortable with understanding these modes of learning and that evidence is input, then that conversation becomes a daily conversation and not necessarily waiting for the next progress report or report card to come. So, 3 essential questions, because it's a short amount of time that you're in a conference, and we think that these are really important to drive the conversation. What is going well? You always want to start with, what are our students excelling at? What have they shown grit and how do they feel? Maybe they've shown confidence. So focusing on things that we started the year doing well. What are 1 or 2 action steps of improvement? This is the hard part for all of us, as we think, okay, what are all the things that we could do better? We want to stay focused. We want to give our kids time, especially as kindergarten through 5th grade students. They need to find a love of learning. If we all of a sudden hit them with all the things they need to do better, and not really find 1 or 2 things to improve and balance with what's going well, we have kids that end up in junior high and high school who remember those conversations with their parents or teachers of how they didn't do well. As a junior high teacher, I had those conversations a lot. They lose that passion for really wanting to just learn. And then the final thing, which is really important, and I think we often forget this in K-5, not because we want to, but because we don't necessarily know that kids at a very young age can handle this. But what can the student, parent, and teacher do in order to support these action steps? It's not all on the parent. It's definitely not all on the teacher. The student, how can they be involved in that process? And how can we hold each other accountable so that when we meet again, we can celebrate those things that are going well now. So that is a review of where we're from, where we're going. We included a couple articles that we are talking about as administrators that some of our teachers have actually shared, and I think are really important because some of these topics are conversations that we've even had at this meeting. First one about exceeding standards, it really talks about, we have 3 levels, and we said we really want to get proficient in being able to assess what meeting the standard is because it's very rigorous. Before we add or include an exceeding standard, and this article does a really good job of just explaining that without rambling like I feel like sometimes I do. The next 2 articles are from ISB specifically with COVID of priority standards, which was just a really great applause to our staff who has really worked hard at finding what our priority standards are in general. And so what we've already chosen is also what ISB selected. It lets us know that we're going in the right direction and we're doing the right thing. Evidence tables are examples of how a student would show proficiency, and I think the one that is included here is English language arts. A really great article that talks about feedback and the power of feedback in the lifelong learner. And then the final one from ASCD is just talking a little bit more, and this is kind of found during remote. I know we've transitioned to hybrid, but we still have a lot of remote learning time in the elementary. And so it really thinks about how do we prioritize learning, the do's and don'ts, and it's specifically at the end. I know you gotta zoom in, so that's why I included the article. But it really talks about why we don't want to focus necessarily on the grades, but how we're continuing to promote feedback for student learning. And then ways and tasks and strategies to do that with students. And questions?
Does Otis move up with the kids into junior high, into high school? Is that the longer term plan as standards-based moves with them? The junior high uses Otis now, but high school is Google Class?
Yes. So the high school and junior high have always had Skyward, so they've had a traditional grade book. Otis allows for both sides. They're still a business. So they allow for standards-based. They also allow for a traditional points-based. So it's a conversation of always teaching to the standard. But I know that junior high and high school have different needs in different ways, and I know that they report out for colleges in different ways as well. So, but yes, Otis is designed to carry with throughout.
Okay.
Any additional questions or comments on that? All right,
All right,
thank you so much.
thank you.
Lindsay.
Next item on the agenda is the update on the 2020-2021 school year.
So just briefly tonight, last week, we started our first week with hybrid learning. And I want to first thank our entire staff, all of our employees, everyone has really stepped up and has done an amazing job. Nobody has ever been through a pandemic, nobody has ever been through hybrid learning before, and also our school families as well. Overall, it's gone very well. Obviously, there's always some hiccups, some areas that we can do better, but we are tweaking things, constantly making improvements, and each day it's getting better and we're seeing more improvement. One of the areas that we're tracking, obviously, is our student attendance and then also our staff. And so this is information as of Friday, last week. Obviously, things are going to be a little bit different as of after today. But each of the buildings, we're tracking students who are sent home because, again, if a student has COVID symptoms, they need to be sent home. Their siblings need to go home. The children need to be quarantined or test negative or go for a doctor's exam and then receive a note that it's unrelated to COVID-19. At South, to date, we've had 2 students who have been quarantined. Manning, we've had 3 students sent home, either because of their siblings or they report not feeling well, and 8 quarantined. Villard, we had 1 student who had a sibling at another building, which has been happening, and then 3 students quarantined. The junior high and high school have had 7, junior high 7, and high school 6 students quarantined in the first week. And then we're also tracking our staff as well, and prior to October 5th, we had 8 staff members test positive, and then since October 5th, we've had 9 test positive, and then 6 exposure either to a spouse, sibling, parent, who may need to quarantine. And so thus far, we've been able to maintain the appropriate level of staffing though, so we've been able to make adjustments. And again, that's across all areas, so kitchen staff, custodial, teachers, secretary, administrative, teaching assistants, so it's not like just one area. But again, overall, we've been managing, it's been going well, and I think this week will be even better. And again, I can't stress enough the great work that everybody in the district is doing in order to make it happen.
Is that tested positive, that's like 1 additional teacher? That's not like 9 teachers in a week?
Correct.
I just wanted to make sure. And same on the kids, so like, for instance, at Manning, there were 3 sent home and 8 quarantined. Does that represent a total of 11 kids, or is that a total of 8 kids?
That was a total of 8 kids.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, any additional questions or comments on the school year update?
Yes. So great job, especially Manning killed it with their pickup on reduced time in the most rapid, within 24 hours. It was dramatically different. It was super impressive to parents. But a question about how we're gonna move forward. So I know that it's been 1 week.
Right, right.
And it's a very precarious situation as COVID cases are increasing in DuPage County and also throughout the United States. So I know our plan is, when we hit that red status, we're gonna give families a week
Right.
to adjust for both the staff and the students. But let's be hopeful, and let's say that the cases stay steady, and we don't need to go back to remote, which I think is a rare possibility, but
Right.
but I think the situation remains the same for the spring as we continue on. How does hybrid change? What's our goals with hybrid throughout the school year? Are we thinking about adding that Wednesday back in, or the elementary schools increasing it from a half day to a full day? Or are we just not there quite yet because of the situation at hand?
Right, we're not there quite yet.
Yeah.
You know, we're just, as Lindsay pointed out during her standards-based grading update, you know, part of what we're trying now is to establish the routines again, and you know, our teachers need to develop their skill set, you know, for the hybrid model. The goal is, though, that if things continue to improve, one thing that we'll have to do is monitor the guidelines if there's any changes in guidelines. One of the things that will always challenge us is if the 6 feet of social distancing, for instance. So that ends up being a challenge then. You know, right now we have some families that have opted for remote learning. Depending upon the school, if we allow parents to make that choice now or at the semester to change and become in person, we may not be able to accommodate all those students and still maintain 6 feet of social distancing. We may not have the classroom space, we may not have the staffing, so some of it's going to be driven by the guidelines, what we can, you know, grow, so to speak, in terms of our hybrid model. The goal would be to lengthen the school day. One of the reasons why we opted to start with a half day is because if, you know, to having lunch in the school is the next challenge. You know, if the students remove their masks, again, there has to be social distancing. You have to have the spaces in order to accommodate that, so is it done in the classroom? Right now, you have a maximum of 50 students in any one space, and so as we're mapping out the year, we're looking at those things and saying, okay, what can we do differently and how can we grow it? The same thing is true of the junior high and the high school. Their challenge is, again, you know, students mixing every class period, and so, you know, the contact tracing and what does it mean if a student tests positive, and what does that mean in terms of the students that need to be quarantined. So part of it depends on if things still trend in a positive direction, if some of the guidelines are revised by the IDPH, that would probably allow us some flexibility. And then as our staff becomes more comfortable and as we develop more confidence, then we'll be able to lengthen it. So the plan is to put together, kind of like we did for the start of the year, we had kind of benchmarks, okay, first 2 weeks, this is where we're going to be at. Things are going well, this is where we're going to be. We do want to start taking a look at, we told our families that they're kind of locked in until January. So once we kind of, again, get a few more days under our belt, then we'll start taking a look at, okay, what does this mean going forward and how can we grow them out?
Okay, we can move on to deficit reduction planning.
And so, you know, Kim recently presented the budget and project their deficit budget, and that prompted some conversation from the board, some questions about, okay, so what happens if we continue down this trend, and what does this look like long term? And so this is by no means a very thorough, getting stakeholders together, this is what it looks like and this is what we need to do. But it's, to kind of answer some of those questions for the board and give them an idea of potentially where we're at and possibly some of the decisions we may need to make. And then the audit will be completed and the board will see it during the November board meeting. And then once we have that piece of information, then we're able to do our projection models and see where we're at. And then start having more targeted conversations about the deficit reduction. So, the reason why, again, we're having this conversation is, first of all, the way schools are funded is different. And so now it's the evidence-based funding model. And our reliance is on local property taxes. The evidence-based funding model is pretty much going to stay flat for us. And so when you start taking a look, it's local property taxes. Our local property taxes, the increase is driven by the CPI, and we're projecting low CPI. The state and its financial woes, that is a lot of uncertainty because there have been some years where we haven't gotten all of our quarterly payments from the state. There are some years they've been delayed until after the fiscal year ended. So there's a lot of uncertainty with that. And then the obvious thing that's occurring right now for us is our expenditures are outpacing our revenues. And so that's what's really creating the deficit for us. And just a reminder, Kim presented this again when she, April, when she talked about the projections, 5-year projections then. And again, this just kind of tells you our expenditures, and when you look at the different areas that our revenue goes towards, 74% of it is salary and benefits. And so by far, the greatest expense we have is salary and benefits. And that's, again, because we always say this when we're talking about our budget. We're a service organization. We provide a service, we don't produce a product. So unlike a business that produces a product, there's materials that they're spending on, there's other things that they're spending on, but for a service organization, it's personnel. Because we need people in order to provide the service of educating students. On the revenue side, again, for us, 84% of our revenue comes from our property taxes. So we do get some from the evidence-based funding model, local revenues, federal revenues, but the bottom line is, for our district, the driver for us are our property taxes. And this is what Kim was pointing out through the projected fund balance. And you can see that at the end of 2019-20, this is based on what you presented in April, we're at about $12 million fund balance. And when you get to 2023, 2024, our fund balance will be at 0. And that's if nothing changes, if we don't do anything differently. The reality is we never let that happen, first of all. We take steps prior to that. And secondly, if a district ever does reach that point where they're at 0 fund balance and they're at deficit spending, that's when the State Board of Education, they would step in and essentially they would take over the district in terms of the financial piece. So you would have to develop your budget, the State Board of Ed would have an oversight committee, it would have to be approved, and so some of the local control that a school district has, they lose. And so not only is it not a sound financial practice to get to that point, but definitely you lose a lot of local control. So we want to start having those conversations so that we don't reach that point. When it comes to the planning, first there's the revenue side of the ledger. And the reality is the revenues, we have very little control over. There's a lot of outside forces. Again, the evidence-based funding model that was developed, that was approved by the legislature, unless there's some amendment made to it. There's very little change in for our district. Again, it's flat, we won't see an increase in it, but it's based on our property taxes, the two drivers there are the CPI for new property. And again, as a local district, we have very little control over what happens with the CPI. We also have very little to do with new property that occurs, that is built in the district. The one thing that a school board does control is an increase in the tax rate. You can have a referendum for a tax rate increase, and that also will help generate more revenue from property taxes. But again, the element that's outside of the board's control is you can pass a resolution, you can have a referendum on the ballot, you can have a campaign to articulate the needs of the registered voters, but essentially it has to be voted on by the registered voters. And so you're relying on getting the majority of registered voters to vote yes on that. The expenditure side, though, that is something that the district does control and has control over. And so you can't spend a lot of sleepless nights worrying about the CPI because, again, that's very little that we can do about CPI. But we do control what happens on the expenditure side. And so, you know, we've been doing this. This isn't like we just start doing this, but you review your supplies, your capital outlay, purchase services, and you look for opportunities to reduce spending where possible. Again, 74% of the budget is salaries and benefits, and so you can focus on your labor agreements and limit your increases through your labor agreements. As the district has retirements, that's a natural way to reduce costs. You can absorb retirements. And then, of course, if you reduce staffing, that also reduces your expenditure on salary and benefits. In terms of retirements, we already know that we have certain areas that we will see retirements over the next couple of years, and those would be opportunities, obviously. In 2010, that's one of the ways that the district addressed the deficit at that time. As people were coming up for retirement, those positions were absorbed in the district. So in terms of the staffing, some of the things that we're looking at is that the idea that you don't replace retirees. And one of the things we've been looking at the enrollment in 2010, 2011, we had 1,487 students, and in 1920, the most recent year, we had 1,279. Our FTE has changed a little bit, but not at the same rate as our enrollment has dropped. Because in 2010, 2011, I think we're about, the ratio was 12.1 students per staff, and in 1920, it's a little bit under 12. So and of course you're including everybody in that, not just classes, teachers. So, but our FTE hasn't necessarily kept pace with the decrease in the number of students. And then the number of staff will depend on how the financial projections change. We'll be wrapping up our audit. And then we're currently involved in labor agreements with 2 of our bargaining units. And so all these things will help us then to make that long-range projection and ultimately determine the steps that we need to take in order to balance our budget and then, turn that tide, so to speak. The nice thing is right now we do have some fund balance, and that's what's allowing us to navigate the pandemic. Because right now there are a lot of unknown costs as you navigate a pandemic. If you decrease your fund balances too much, then the next time you have that situation where you need to rely on your fund balances, you may not have enough there, and then you're forced into doing some types of borrowing, which is never a good thing for a school district to do. So this is kind of, again, just, yeah, I think that's it. So, that kind of, again, it's just very high level, you know, this is just the board asking questions about, okay, what does it look like and how do we address this? And, the reality is, for a school district, it comes down to staffing. And that's ultimately how we reduce your deficit.
Any questions from anybody?
How, is this our third or fourth year of running a deficit? I always forget which.
We had a deficit in the ed fund.
Yes.
So we've had since 2016.
So since then, what sort of things have we done already to reduce our spending, to reduce that expenditure side of the equation?
We have reduced some of our staffing over those couple of years. You know, each year, when we had January, February as an admin team, we take a look at our staffing and we make decisions. So we did reduce some staffing to try to stem the deficit.
I think it was the budget meeting, Kim, you talked about this year we reduced building budgets as well
For fiscal year 20.
for this
For the one
this
year that we're
current
in.
school year.
And we either held the building budgets flat, so they haven't received increases, or they expect increases.
This year we actually decreased in some years. We cut off spending and then, first January for February, where we're at. And so they wind up spending less than they were allocated as well.
How long does it typically take to right a ship, quote unquote, as far as reducing a deficit? I mean, when you've had several years of $1 million, close to $1 million deficit, you can't crack that in a year, or certainly you don't want to for the sake of your staff and students. How, in other districts that have had to reduce deficit, does it take 5 years to do that? How long does that typically take?
Depending on how aggressive you want to be,
Yeah.
3 to 5 years, you know, that timeline.
What were some of the actions that we took previously? Because we had a deficit, 2010, somewhere in there? We had a pretty significant, so what were some of the actions that we were able to take then, since we righted the ship?
Just prior to Kim and I starting the district, there were some staffing reductions that were made. And then in addition to that, the same type of thing, there was a cycle of retirements that most businesses were absorbed. They were able to negotiate a contract that had 1 year.
And then the soft breaks.
Software. I think every bargaining group, they were able to get a contract where they had 1 year of Hartford. Yeah, we did. Hartford. So those, and then also again looking at areas where possibly there was we were able to make some cuts in staff as well.
So we've got 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 teachers, 1 custodian, and 1 administrator retiring in the next 4-ish years. So 8 teachers that we wouldn't necessarily replace, which would affect class sizes. Where else would we see some of those effects?
It's difficult to say right now, but probably primarily class sizes, you know. And then you would, the goal would be not to impact any type of program that you currently have in the district.
Okay, so try not to cut programs, but potentially adjust class sizes. Do we have like an average class size? And I realize that like Manning, Miller, junior high, high school, vastly different education areas, and so our class sizes are not necessarily gonna be the same in every building, but do we have like an average per building or an average per district, roughly?
Roughly, I think we're about 22 to 23 is the average.
Okay,
That's without, confirming that, but that would be based upon last year's standard.
okay. And so like a reduction, like these 8 folks retiring, regardless of kind of location, if you were to just throw it out there, what type of increase in class size would that potentially have?
You could get upwards of 26, 28 per class.
Okay, and we would need to reduce more than that, because that's, call it
It all depends
$700,000,
on,
potentially.
right, potentially, it all depends on where, again, the current year's audit comes in. That again starts the timeline, so to speak. So if the year comes in better than what we projected, then that pushes, that time we hit $0, that pushes out more. And then also, obviously, we have labor agreements that we still need to finalize. And depending upon what happens with the labor agreements, then they also help the bottom line. And so then once you have those pieces, then you'll be able to more accurately determine what additional cuts we need.
And is it possible to like move money between funds? Like we're having trouble in it, can we like rebalance our, no.
No, you can't.
So we gotta figure it out in the education fund, which is 74% salaries.
With the audit, is that where you project your student numbers? Or
No.
how do you ever get projected with that?
We've done enrollment projections for the past. We did one, it wasn't too long ago, and I could probably get that report to the board. And basically, the enrollment projections are based on birth rates in DuPage County and then cohort survival. So there's a company we send the data to, and then they put together projections. But essentially, they look at what the trends are, like a group that starts in kindergarten, how many, when you pick up students or lose students as they move through. And so that'll, we have that information. The audit tells us, basically where we're at with our fund balances, what our actual, the budget is an estimate of your expenditures and revenue. Your audit will tell you what your actuals were. And so where your actual end of the year balances are. So again, if they come in a little higher than the 5-year projection had, then that, if we calculate that projection again, that ultimately tells us, again, how far out our fund balances are.
Did you mention in here when we were at like a 0? I'm sorry, did I miss it?
Yeah, right now it would be 23, 24 school year.
A couple years, okay.
In what fund?
That would be-
Overall?
That would be overall.
So I know we've not had our fund balances. We haven't had our fund balance policy for the education fund. It's 45%, right? And the state comes in at 25%. I think we talked about that last meeting.
Overall.
Overall. Not, they don't.
Right, they use
Specific.
ONA transportation
Yeah.
EMA looks at a little differently than the state does.
And they wouldn't necessarily come in at that point. At that point,
You
we would have to have a
reduction.
deficit reduction plan. And then you then have to demonstrate that you are reversing the trend.
So that between, if we're like at 38% into our education fund, to go to 0 overall in 2024 is a pretty quick clip.
Right.
Can you help me understand that?
Well, again, because year one, you will know actuals, but then everything else is a projection. And whatever you were modeling then keeps things you can change now, because if the sooner you can make a change, the more long-lasting that impact is. So if you're making a negative change, it goes quicker. If you're making a positive change, that fund balance extends. We know that we on a cash basis, we came in a lot better than we projected. And we talked about, some reasons why. We didn't have to do the same kind of spending. Interest income was up. We received a hack brush donation of $250,000. We have to spend that though somewhere. So, all those things kind of go into play with this. Obviously, if we put in a contingency of $1.1 million, we hired a few additional people tonight. If we keep hiring those additional people, we're going to go and have more of a negative balance than just the basic bottom line without the contingency. We don't have to do some of those things, we'll be better off. We don't know what's going to happen, with the state revenues. There's a lot of unknowns right now with COVID. It's a very difficult time to be making, to do budgets and projections. And that's why you continually reforecast. And so we'll have a much better idea as soon as I can reforecast everything.
After the audit?
After the audit. And then we'll look at some of the assumptions that we made of what's happening with our Medicare revenue and some things like that. So, all of those things with COVID, our revenues are going to be lower, and that's projected in the budget, but we don't know how much lower. So all of our school fees, if we don't have athletics, we still have some of the coaching costs, but we don't have the revenue to offset any of that. So there's a lot more variables even this year than there have been in prior years.
So there are spots where we're paying more where we would have gotten, like you mentioned, the athletics, right? We still have the expenditure going out for the coaches, but we're not getting any revenue back for any of those events and that kind of stuff. So that's maybe like a overspend, but like transportation or somewhere else we're potentially spending less.
Correct.
Okay. And overall, we're spending a little bit less this year, but this is also a very special flower type of year with COVID. Okay. And this audit, which comes out mid-November, so will that give us a better understanding of like where we can affect the most change that will kind of exponentially help us year over year, like some of the things that we could do this year in 2020, maybe not immediately, but pretty quickly, because we can do some things pretty quickly because we're small, but will that help us understand, like, if you do this one thing this year, exponentially, this is going to help you the most over the next couple of years so that in 2023 or 2024, you're not borrowing?
The audit will give us our actuals on the modified accrual basis. So we do our budget and our financials when I present them monthly on cash. Modified accrual takes into account the salaries and expenditures that are due and owed as of June 30th, but we don't pay them out until July and August. So all of our teachers, TAs, at June 30th, we haven't paid their full salaries out. So the audit reflects that our actual balances as if we had paid those. Because if, let's say, everyone quit on June 30th, we owe them still those July and August paychecks. So that's what this does, it trues that up. And then it's the 5-year financial projection that we can look at, put that data in, the actuals from the audit, put in the budget, and then look at that, see where we're at, and then it's up to us. The audit doesn't tell us where to make changes. But again, when we're looking at where 84% of our expenditures are, that's the most logical place to begin. And so then we can model what if we do a reduction of, this many FTE, what's the impact on that over the next 5 years? So there's different things that we can model.
Thank you.
Anyone have any other questions?
Are we gonna, have like is finance committee going to help with that, or are we gonna do that as a whole board? After that November audit, continue to have these conversations as a board of how this is gonna look? I mean, these are really not fun things we're talking about here. And I think if there's any way we can minimize the impact to our staff and students, we should be creatively teaming up in any way that we can. I don't know if we can have a subcommittee, or is it part of our strategic plan, or?
We'd start with the finance committee. And then the finance committee would have a discussion about the process that we want to undertake in terms of creating our deficit reduction plan. We bring that to the full board for a full board discussion. And then depending upon what the finance committee and full board, ultimately if they want to see what other stakeholders they want involved in the conversation, And so we'll start with the finance committee.
So how did this happen again? So, right, 2010 we had this happen, and then we reversed the trend, and like cyclical actions, right? The world is cyclical and it kind of comes back and forth. Is there any one thing in particular that we've done in the district? Was there anything, how did we get here? Yeah. Can you help me understand? Was it dual language? Did we build something? Did we hire somebody? Like, did we pull those teachers out of the sky? How is our expenditures on the salary line just exploding to an extent?
I'll start now. But in terms of dual language, I know that's come up before when we were talking about reducing the section at 20. And when we grew the dual language program, we did it very purposefully. And so as we had an elementary teacher retire, a teacher that we would hire would be the teacher that would teach a section of dual language. And so we were able to pretty much grow that program without changing the number of staff that we had. The other piece to it is those students who are in dual language, those students would have to be in the classroom. So if it wasn't a dual language teacher with them, it would be a monolingual teacher. And so we'd still have the same number of sections. We'd still have 5 sections of kindergarten, 5 sections of first grade, 5 sections of second, all the way down the line. Instead of 4 monolingual and 1 dual, it would be 5 monolingual. So the dual language program isn't the source. When you take a look at, again, our revenues are outpacing our expenditures. So when you look at our
Expenditures are outpacing.
Thank you. So when you look at our revenue, the CPI hasn't kept pace with the salary increases. So if you look at the different salary increases that we've had, they've outpaced the increase in CPI. So that's one source that,
I mean, that's really the biggest contributor. We have not increased building budgets. There's certain things we don't have control over. Some of our, again, I've talked about outplaced students, some of our tuition programs and things like that. We don't have control over those cost increases. The number of students that need special services and things like that. But the majority of it is salary and benefits.
Has that been acknowledged across the board that, the state that we're in, we have to get closer to the CPI? Because that's where our revenue comes in. That's all we have. To prosper, we have, at this point, we have to get closer to that rate. That rate of change or rate of increase is closer to what CPI is going to do for this. And that's something that's acknowledged.
We've had conversations, every time that we've had negotiations with different bargaining groups, we've always tried to kind of increase that driven by CPI. The reality is where we end up very often, on the surface, it may look like we're addressing it, but, overall, we're still not getting where we
So that, like I said, we're a service industry, we're not generating.
Right.
To go by.
So I'm looking at the revenue and expenditure projections. I just want to make sure that I'm reading this right. So if I'm looking at fiscal year 2021, 22 million total revenue, and then the percentage next to it is 1.67, is that the expected increase from fiscal year 21 to 22?
Where are you looking at?
This one.
What is that document?
Ed fund revenue expenditure in deficit reduction planning. PDF.
Board docs.
Yeah, board docs, sorry.
Under deficit
I should have started there.
Podcast.
Okay, so the 5-year plan.
Yeah, so like I'm looking at the total revenue line, 22 million, 22 million, 22 million, 23 million, 23 million. Is that the percentage increase of year to year? That percentage, 1.67, 1.14, 0.55?
Yeah, Leah.
The delta percent.
I don't.
Oh, so for the revenue,
Total
I
revenue.
see 1.87?
Is that an 8?
Yes.
6, that's a 6.
Oh,
I
overall.
got Zoom, I
Okay,
got
was
Zoom.
thinking-
Yeah, I'm looking
Yes.
overall, yes.
Yes, uh-huh.
Okay, so from 2021 to 2022, we expect like a 1.67% increase in revenue from our taxes and whatnot. But then if I'm looking down at our expenditures, our salary cost from 2021 to 2022 is gonna increase by almost 3%.
Right.
So we're gonna get, our salary and benefit line is gonna grow at double the rate that our revenues coming in are.
That was the projection from April.
Okay.
We passed it somewhat.
Leah, are you looking at the 5-cast 11-year perspective?
Yes.
I was like,
I'm looking at this. Yes, 5-year expected?
Oh, I'm sorry, thank you.
Okay, because I'm just seeing, like, and I'm a percentage person, because $22 million and $24 million, a lot of money, percentages make more sense to me, so, but it appears to me that our salary line is nearly doubling our increase in our expected revenues, which, yeah,
Is that,
helps me understand.
in this, oh, this is just the ed fund.
Just the ed fund, yeah. Not the other one, not the projected fund balances.
Yeah.
That is just a real sad ski slope. Yeah, not that one, the ed fund revenue and expenditure projections. So just trying to understand, like, in the exact same way that we make an effect now and it helps us for 5 years and that expands on itself, that helps me understand how we kind of ballooned so quickly. And then you mentioned with the dual language program, you mentioned that we had some folks that were retiring and replaced them. I'm going to assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, those folks that were retiring were near the top of the pay scale, and the people that we replaced them with were not necessarily, because I wouldn't think that we'd hire a about to retire teacher, or we would, or I don't know, but I'm just gonna assume that the retirees were at the top of the pay scale.
Right.
And so our actual cost there was even a little bit less to bring it in? Okay.
Can you help me understand why, that looking at the same document that Leah was looking at, why is it, this is a really dumb question, but why is it different? Like, why are the percentages different every year? for salaries and expenditures. So when she's talking about how it's going to increase by 3.41% for FY 2020, and then in FY '23, I know these are just projections.
Right.
But it's 2.59. What makes it almost a whole percentage different?
Well, some of it's your projections of what CPI
Okay,
is doing.
Okay.
And if your different, things run off of CPI, and your projections of CPI change throughout that, then, again, where you have retirees,
okay,
so they're factored into there and
Gotcha.
things like that.
thank you.
And so you could have, again, those salaries go up as people, their increases, but then they retire, then the salaries drop.
Gotcha.
Okay.
So in those projections, you put in this
All
five,
that stuff, yes.
oh, okay, that's good to know.
Because what is our heads up for retirement that we typically get? How many years?
3 to 4.
3 to 4.
Goodness. It's stressing me out looking at this. Well, it'll be good to revisit and as a finance committee and after we have the audit and.
I guess, no, so stressed out. Is there something I'm missing that, like, if you look at the salaries and benefits, is there an expectation that we are supposed to get money from some other source like that? Because it's so different, like you see that our revenue changes are not very high from CPI. But, like, the expectation is that salaries and benefits are covered, and that rate of change is so much higher. Is there, I'm missing something, where the expectation that money is got somewhere else, on trees, I don't know.
No.
That's the
Well,
problem.
Like,
Leprechauns?
are there other grants, like I said, something else that we're supposed to be doing, and looking at?
Well, and that's, I mean, essentially that's the problem, and as I referenced, there's very little control we have over our revenue stream. And again, we could do a referendum for a tax rate increase. That's one thing that could be done, but other than that, CPI is outside of our control. What the state does with their funding is outside. I mean, we can write letters to our legislators and, do those types of things, but again, it's outside of our control. And so that's why our focus is on the expenditure. That is something that we can have some control over. But yeah, that's essentially the problem.
Any additional comments, questions? Okay, then let's move forward with a couple of action items. Tonight we have two bargaining unit contracts for approval. The first one is the approval of the WESPA contract. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the WESPA one-year extension of contract as presented.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Ms. Conover?
Yes.
Ms. Hoover?
Yes.
Mr. Donio?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Ms. Stromeyer?
Yes.
Second contract, approval of WCMA contract. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the negotiated agreement between Community Unit School District 201 Board of Education and Westmont Custodial and Maintenance Association, WCMA, for the contract 2019 and 20 through 2021 and 22 as presented.
So moved.
Second?
Roll call, please.
Ms. Conover?
Yes.
Ms. Hoover?
Yes.
Mr. Donio?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Ms. Stromeyer?
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
And the superintendent's report.
Just a couple things in my report. One is that Thursday, October 22nd, and Friday, October 23rd, we will have parent-teacher conferences. Like many things this year, the format will be different than prior years. They'll be held via Zoom. but parents still make their appointments in the same manner. They can use Skyward to make an appointment to set up conferences, or they can contact their child's school. But again, that will be Thursday, October 22nd, and Friday, October 23rd. And then one other item, typically the board would be attending the Tri-I Conference School Board Convention in November. And again, earlier during the summer, the School Board Association announced that they would not be having the conference. They have since then, though, they are going to be offering a virtual conference. And some of the presentations will be done virtually. You'll have access to all the materials and also be able to view some of the presentations. I think it's a $50 cost for that. And if a board member would like to attend virtually, you can contact Sharon. And Sharon then will take care of registering you for the school board conference.
Coming to the parent-teacher conference.
I was like, where's Sharon?
Oh, no.
Not the first time.
I don't know her yet.
Kevin, just to be clear, on the parent-teacher conferences, there's no opportunity for a parent to personally schedule a method, an in-person meeting. It has to be done via Zoom.
Has to be done via Zoom.
Okay. Board reports? I guess the only thing I'll add at board reports is that everyone, I'm sure, in this room is aware, and I hope everyone else is aware, there's an election coming up, so I hope everyone is registered and is prepared to vote. We do have some important issues, obviously, at the federal level and obviously at the state as well. And in light of our conversation about budgeting and whatnot, there is a tax referendum on the ballot, which is important for various purposes, and something that voters should take a look at and weigh their choice on that topic. So I encourage everyone to make sure you're taking care of that and get out and vote. Any other comments? Public comment?
I asked before, can you just mention something about the census, especially since apparently we're going to have no money in 4 years? You might want to mention the census and make sure everybody is counted. By my understanding,
very
Westmont's
funny.
only counted at 75% right now.
Okay. And that is responding to the census as well, another obligation of
Yeah, and
citizens
it's kind of been
to-
forgotten with the pandemic, people are not doing it.
Yeah.
The pandemic has probably had a negative effect on census taking, and so if you have not done that, certainly please do. It certainly helps your local governments reclaim funding from the federal government.
And it takes like
It
approximately
literally
90
takes like
seconds.
3 minutes.
Yeah.
And I believe counting is ending very soon.
Yes, the end of
Yeah,
October.
yes.
They extended it a month, but.
Well, but I think
it's gonna
they took it back.
be- Yeah, it's going to
Yeah.
be the end of this month.
All right, very good. Future meetings, Westmont Junior High School PTO meeting, October 14th at 7 p.m. Parent-teacher conferences, October 22nd and 23rd. There is no school on October 23rd, and our next board meeting is October 27th. Okay. Chair will entertain a motion to enter closed session to discuss personnel issues, collective bargaining, and the superintendent's evaluation.
So moved.
Second?
Roll call, please.
Ms. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Redonio?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Ms. Stromeyer?
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Ms. Conover?
Yes.
And there's no action items following closed session.